A Man Below Zero. Chapter 1. Egypt, Cairo, Saturday morning, January 1, 2067. In a rocket heading from Cairo to London. In two opposite seats, Dr. Shahin and Engineer Karim sat, each of which seemed to be a copy of the other, as if they were twins, although the first was Egyptian and the second was Indian. And so, all the passengers of the rocket were similar copies of one picture as brothers and sisters, although each one of different nationalities. A mixture of English, French, American, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, Indian, Indonesian, Senegalese, and Eskimo. We know that from the names. No one has a passport with a reference to his nationality or his country. All the information on the travel card is the name, age, blood type, protein number, magnetic equivalent, electrical equivalent, nervous load. Just an algebra code, codes, numbers. It's all about his personality. Dr. Shahin turned from the rocket window to the cloud, which flew like a cotton cut, and he whimpered.
It's been 3.5 seconds since the rocket took off. I'm getting bored.
Designed with his lips.
I don't understand how our grandparents could have taken hours to travel on an engine-driven plane. A slow turtle cuts a kilometer in a minute. Imagine the awful. Their days were the fastest way to travel. And every 100,000 kilometers, the plane goes down to fill its tanks with gas. Imagine a plane that fills its lockers with fuel.
Engineer Karim.
The gasoline you don't like was liquid gold in those days. Who owns the gas? Who owns the world? The poor Bedouin who was finding a petrol well was turning into a millionaire. Those days, they were digging the ground with their fingernails to generate this gold in any way. If they had now been sent from their graves to see this black gold that they were shipped lying in a single dump with coal, firewood, and slingshots.
Dr. Shahin.
Luckily, no one's coming from his grave.
And 1 second later, they were both walking down Regent Street, London. And the sun is bright. There is no sign of that grey atmosphere that London has known over the ages. Its atmosphere has been adapted. Dr. Shahin said as he entered a narrow tunnel and then boarded a smooth, wheelless snake train.
My lecture at the university is scheduled in 1 minute and 10 seconds. I hope we don't steal time.
Engineer Karim.
Relax. These geomagnetic crawls are too fast. And you'll be there before your appointment.
He grabbed the door behind him. And when the whistle went up, it made a very low sound. The worm ship slipped into the tunnel as if it were a shell. Dr. Shahin threw his head on the bench and closed his eyes in a short nap. The vehicle was very balanced, despite its speed. The cabin was air-conditioned. In the air, Chanel's perfume is fresh, and the sounds of light music flow from a horn at the head of the seat. Engineer Karim.
The advantage of this vehicle is that we got off the road brake and the signs. There's no one else walking in the cylindrical tunnel.
Engineer Karim looked at his watch and gently shook his fellow sleepy.
We arrived at the university.
The crawling was completely stopped, and the seats began to move vertically as if they were automatic elevators that went up one by one to the surface of the earth, where the passenger quickly landed and headed his way. Dr. Shahin extended his hand to his colleague, said,
Meet an hour later in the cafeteria.
He rushed to the lecture hall. There were over 1,000 students. What was striking was the close similarity between their faces, as if they were brothers, the same observation that we noticed in the rocket. Dr. Shahin has posted a large map of nylon on a lantern and he started explaining.
This was the map of the world 100 years ago. These lines that you see are regional divides and boundaries that divide the world into countries, and we're not going to be able to see them. In fact, the world was divided into two large parts, sovereign states that wanted to prevail more. and backward developing countries are struggling to live, and they don't know how to live. The conflict took place between the two states in a conflict of power and authority.
Dr. Shahin asks and answers himself.
Can anyone tell me where did we stand in our words at the previous lecture? We talked about Russia, China, and America. The complex relationships between the policies of the three. The story is short. On August 8, 1999, the Third World War was fought between America and Russia. China stood neutral and said that it could not participate in the crime of the extermination of the human race. She said she would try to be a messenger of peace. It's a questionable situation. With the old interpretations that we have learned, caste conflict has always been the influential force that shaped history. This conflict between China and Russia seems to be a difficult and incomprehensible equation, and it is undoubtedly a direct force that has shaped our current history. Despite this, the conflict was never a class conflict. Proletaria and proletaria. Where are the layers? Maybe it was a racist struggle. Maybe he had a psychological struggle that reflected something in the hearts of both peoples. In any case, the economic factor seems to have been so powerful and overwhelming in ancient history that history has already been going on, and the beliefs, arts, and even psychological situations of individuals and groups seem to be merely reactions to the economic situation. But at a later stage, things changed so fast. And we've seen history decide things in people, not just wrestling between their layers. And it seems that human nature is more complex than ancient philosophers imagined. The one-sided interpretation of man and history was beautiful, but there was a simplification of the truth. And we're saying that there are things inside of us that we fight for, and there are things outside that we fight over. And that the economic and psychological factors together make up every decision that we make. And there are many things that have changed in the world that have changed people's minds faster than all thinkers had expected. We return to our words to tell the rest of the tragedy. The war itself has not lasted more than a few days. On August 8th, it caught fire, and on the 11th of the same month, after the destruction of cities and the deaths of millions of people, the storm of Seoul and the fall of Seoul and the floods made it impossible to continue anything. The ionospheric belt around the globe was disturbed by sudden radiation generated by atomic detonation, which led to magnetic electric whirlwinds that lit the entire Earth. The Earth, as the Dutch astronomer Selena said, is almost out of orbit. It's been a month of hell. Heaven was trembling and squeezing itself in a stream that wiped the green and the dry. And the lightning breaks out as a warlock of fire, stabs and stabs, fires, destroys entire forests, and settles them to the ground. Then suddenly the calm began to be as calm as death, and they said, thanks to these floods, she's melted all the harmful radiation, and we're done with it. But there was something brewing in a damn calmness in this soft paste of clay, water, blood, dung, corpses, mold, worms, uterus, and radiation residue. Something damn slowly started to reveal itself. So weird situations began to emerge. A disease like the plague. But it's not a plague. He showed up in isolated situations. And then people started sweeping. They're like flies, falling in front of an invisible spray. They smell it, and it swells, and they swell, and then they explode like stinky bags to spread that invisible spray again. A strange phenomenon with this disease. It's equal to a strange precision among all people. He didn't leave town. He didn't let a village. He didn't spare a country. From the far North Pole to the far South Pole, across the equator. From the far East to the far West, across all the Greenwich lines. and from the Sorbonne student to the Negro Neanderthal. He shall not stop him with a cold, nor shall he block him with frost, nor shall he repel him with flame. For the first time in the history of mankind, all human beings have stood before a machete that is equal to those of the Coombs and reaped them all in appalling justice. And for the first time in the bloody history of humanity, people have gathered as brothers. Not brothers' words and slogans. It is true brotherhood that makes no difference. Brothers of pain, agony, and death. Brothers of the infirm. For the first time, the Sorbonne student realized that he didn't break up with the Neanderthal. And the American realized that he wasn't richer than the Russian. And the Russian realized it wasn't more right than the Chinese. And the colonists everywhere realized that he wasn't more entitled to the country than the owner. And the Christian realized that he wouldn't be involved in heaven without the Buddhists. The judge realized that he was no more just than the criminal to whom he was sentenced. Everybody's gonna take a nap. Everybody's dying. Everybody's got a hell of a lot of them. In a real repentance, crazy remorse, and bloody apology, everyone threw into each other's arms, kissing each other as they died. A view that can't erase the memory of those who saw it. In a purely fraternal, united start, scientists from all races, from all bees and boredom, engage in sincere research to learn about the disease and seek a way to survive. The loins of love and affection, and the vows of true loyalty, began to hesitate in the dark of death. For the first time in the 6,000 million year old world, on Sunday morning of January 2000, the world was brightened. And it was already united in one country. The geographical boundaries between countries have disappeared. Governments have united in a World Council, and one budget is set up for the sole purpose of scientific research in order to eliminate the creepy death that threatens the true extinction of human life everywhere. All the military forces have been dissolved, and they have become recruiting labor armies to serve scientists. All police, intelligence, and espionage forces have turned into forces to spy on the microbe and arrest the epidemic. The prisons have opened their doors so that their inmates can share in the feverish work for life. The mines were all congested in one front, attacking death in all his strongholds, but death continued to stab in the darkness. And every time the invisible killer escapes, all filters are executed with no trace left under electronic microscopes or in front of microchemical examiners. It was clearly an extremely delicate, tiny object. And he's a virus type. As the end of January came, a scientist from India, Rajamnon, had made the first step in the miracle. He was able to plant this virus in snake embryos. Rajamnon discovered that this virus is in fact one fraction of the DNA protein, known in the natural nucleus of the cell, but from the perspective of its forms. If the virus penetrates the living cell in the mucous membrane of the nose or trachea, it can transform the body into a laboratory dedicated to its service and reproduction. So the body turns into massive plague tumors that explode into millions and billions of viruses to spread into the air. Death spreads again. And the body can't distinguish between orders from the virus and normal orders from its cells. Because the virus is from the same DNA that makes up the nucleus of the natural body's cells, so the body destroys itself without knowing. It's a virus. Like a battalion commander. He's dressed as a battalion commander. He disguises himself. But he's actually a leader of the enemy's pimp. And a soldier can't find out who he really is. And the result shall be that they shall obey his orders, and their destruction shall be done. Rajamnon discovered that this virus was created by the act of atomic radiation in a mixture of blood, mud, and mold. On the 10th day of February of the same year, Chinese Dr. Miang Wei passed the virus and planted it in snake eggs under special conditions of heat and acid to extract a vaccine such as smallpox. The resulting vaccine has proven to generate permanent immunity against the disease. So it was possible to stop the creeping death. After having charged more than half of the human population, 3 billion deaths in 3 years. And the world came out of distress, and he survived a certain demise. More importantly, he's out, and he's cleaned up. He was cleansed by great pain. His unity is the brotherhood of fate and suffering in the face of death. He had the dream of politicians and philosophers that the weapon could not achieve. The dream of one world and one government, where all resources are dedicated to serving all in true brotherhood, and where everyone works in love as much as he can and takes as much love as he needs. Socialism was finally founded on the right foundation. It's not the economy alone that's inevitable. It's about the inevitable nature of love and the availability of a psychopath who collects hearts and hands for honest and constructive work. In 10 years, the new world appeared to rise out of nowhere. Millions of arms came together to achieve the impossible. Atomic energy has been turned into a good bomb that spreads grace everywhere. Salt water turns into fresh water. The deserts are calmed, and the food is kept uncooled. Humans are provided with massively rapid and affordable transportation, and easy fuel from oil is provided to citizens thousands of times more robust than it is. Using this new energy, it has been possible to adapt to the urban atmosphere and rain down in the countryside. Wetness and dehydration on demand. And develop new fruits and vegetables. In 2025, traffic signals had become automatic and suspended in the air. Cause all the transportation has become air transport. Rockets, drones, and satellites. In 2036, the Earth was able to pierce and develop underground transports that automatically moved with gravity. Without fuel in special cylinder tunnels, it reaches the continents faster than any other aircraft can. In 2037, the first spacecraft landed on Mars. It has a full staff of doctors, chemists, electricians, maize, agriculture, and industry. In 2048, the human being was frozen, canned, and preserved for 3 full months, during which all his vital operations were suspended. No breathing, no pulse, no feeding, no digestion, no acting, no feeling, full winter hibernation. Industrial death involves cooling the body to absolute zero, 273 degrees below zero, which is the maximum degree at which the movement of the atom stops at the same time as the coldest degree known in the space of the universe. It was then possible to bring this frozen human being back to life by gradually warming up to normal heat without losing much of his vital properties except for a limited memory loss. This scientific event was considered to be the greatest triumph of the human record in space travel. Because he can overcome the problem of shipping huge amounts of food and oxygen gas. It is indispensable that he freezes in winter hibernation throughout the journey. He neither eats nor drinks nor breathes. Also, this intense cooling solved the most intractable disease and became a new fashion for lovers instead of suicide. One of them gets into a freezer for a month and then comes to life, and he forgets what happened to his girlfriend's betrayal.
Laughs from students. And that's where the sound of softness has risen, interrupting the lectures.
Do you think, Doctor, there are lovers in this age?
Dr. Shahin.
Yes, Rosetta. Unfortunately, this is the only thing that has not evolved. We have evolved in our minds, our morals, and our civilian lives. But we have not developed much in our feelings for women.
Rosetta said in a passionate tone.
Dr. Shannon, May I have a statement?
Dr. Shahin.
Here you go.
Rosetta, in a voice, tried as much as she could to hide his trouble.
Dr. Shannon, I love you.
Dr. Shahin's face is red with blood and a little hesitating, and he says,
So as well. Also.
Cheers have hesitated all over the hall. Dr. Shahin.
Okay. Back to our words, 2061.
Rosetta whispered to him in love and spoke herself with a faint tone.
2061, my love.
Dr. Shahin.
In 2061, man's greatest step was to break the energy line. Indonesian naturalist Demawa was able to destroy the neutron, the core of the atom, and its secrets. The energy from the bone was so great that the island on which the experiment was conducted disappeared in the ocean, and the amount of material that Demawa detonated was smaller than the head of a pin. This means, in a simple calculation, that if a half-aspirin disk is blown up, its neutrons can split the globe in half, as we make oranges on food or tear it to several small satellites orbiting space. The problem was after this discovery, it's how to control this energy and base it. How do we use it to drive a rocket, run a motor, or heat an oven? All the experiments failed to tame this new genie. Every time he blew up on his own account, not ours, he left behind a hole the size of the Arizona desert. The Turkish scientist Ismatiga proposed to launch a missile from this new dynamite to blow the atmosphere of Venus so that the mysterious surface of the planet in which the words differed could be seen, and that proposal was still under consideration. In 2062, Egyptian chemist A. Badran manufactured pills called Happy Dool after he developed herbs that grow in oases, which is considered to be the ideal drug for this age and an effective treatment for anxiety, depression, psychological stress, and inactivity. And the constant comrade of the pocket to bring happiness and optimism. There are recommendations to introduce it into the dairy industry, such as chocolate and pancakes, mixed in small quantities in ordinary bread, and Dr. A. Badran also invented the transistor lung and the transistor heart to replace the artificial heart and lung. Each one had a room of great size. And his latest chemical invention was a harem sleeping shirt that could be worn and eaten.
Student from down the hall.
Old. His name is Kamaruddin.
Laughter and whispering. Dr. Shahin continued.
The most important event of this year was the archaeological discovery made by Iraqi researcher Fairuz at the bottom of the Atlantic when she first found the lost Atlantis and revealed the traces of her ancient civilization. The facts underneath the bottom show that our ancestors from Atlantis knew electricity, maize, modern industry, multi-story architecture, and worship. They had temples and structures similar to plows and pyramids. The doctor says they also knew about lipstick. And there's a nerdos aboard of this covenant that has like cartoons about a man and his mother-in-law, which means that it's been on this earth for more than 500,000 years, a civilization that looks like ours and maybe even better than it is. And then it went away.
Front row student interrupting.
Isn't this proof that it's all a mess? Everything from the finest of civilizations to the lowest of individuals. Doesn't it look like it's all jerked off? And why do we crack our heads with all this science so long as the end is in vain? I want to understand. And what is wisdom in day and night?
Dr. Shahin.
At least we've got the night under control and daylight with electrical and electronic lights.
No. I mean a long astronomical night.
When the sun goes out, I think we'll have moved completely from this land and move our isolation to another planet.
No, I mean the long astronomical night ahead of us. Didn't you read the latest astronomical observatory data and how the universe began to shrink after it continued to expand for 13,000 million years? And the stars are now approaching each other at an enormous speed. After a long time or a short time, these stars will collide and destroy the architecture of the universe and shrink, melt, and melt into a compressed paste, like the grip of the hand of the raw material in which the creation began.
Rosetta, whispering to herself, looking at Dr. Shahin.
I'm the one who melted. And melt. Why do you all think about millions of cosmic years and forget your short ages? Let the universe go to hell as long as our hearts have an atom of love. Why didn't one naturalist think of the atom of love?
She stares at the air with a love look, and her eyes are radiant. The doctor notes her lack of attention.
You're not with us, Rosetta.
Rosetta's waking up to herself.
I'm with you. With you very much.
Dr. Shahin.
Who are you thinking about?
I'm thinking of a dilemma in natural science.
Really? What dilemma?
We've thought about all the atoms. And we studied the properties of every atom. Except for one very important atom.
What corn?
The atom of love.
The corn of love.
Believe me, it's the real corn that makes up the universe.
Generally, it's an idea for a new specialty that you can single out.
Rosetta, in love.
Believe me, I'm very special in it.
Girls and boys are clowning. Dr. Shahin hits the table, trying to restore order.
In 2063, Hungarian Dr. Agina discovered a way to implant the human embryo outside the womb and to raise it in a tube until it was fully developed. Since that moment, the children of bears, such as lab rabbits, have become a fertile field for testing chemical, hormonal, and radiological effects. That's how the Egyptian scientist Dr. Ghanem has to control the elements of genetics. The child shall inherit any new quality he or she wishes and shall eliminate any genetic quality he or she does not want. You are all aware of the intervention of the Supreme Council of Laws and the attempts of the legislator de Grovia to enact a new law prohibiting such experiments as major criminal offenses, which could amount to murder, willful mutilation, accidental or intentional disability, and, at the very least, interference with the freedom of the citizen, subjecting him to coercion, reparation, coercion without his permission, counsel, and coercion in cases of fate that he has not chosen. How the legal debate continues so far and the experiences are suspended.
One of the students asked,
What do you think, Doctor?
The doctor hesitated for a moment and then answered,
I say that these experiments should be freely and unconditionally permitted.
There is a protest in the hall, especially among female students, while the doctor continues.
It is the human being who must take over guardianship over nature, not the other way around. It is the only conscious mind among all these blind phenomena.
Student.
But how does man take guardianship of nature, her child's son, and one of its products? Nature is 23,000 million years old. And we're no more than 1 million years old. And what we know about this nature is negligible besides what we don't know. If nature is blind, how can it explain the evolution theory and its evolution from the anguish to a sane human being in a direction of vision and mind?
Dr. Shahin.
The insight of nature seems to us to be delusional because we see only its virtues. Her mistakes and crimes are all lost. One of the crimes of nature we knew was extinct reptiles. Those freaks that Mother Earth had by mistake, and then she went extinct. And this mistake. Millions of other mistakes have been filled with earthquakes, flooded with oceans, and blindfolded. History is a fake note. And a false book of works. It proves only the good and the result that nature shows you as sane, visionary, and not wrong.
Student.
I understand that man can judge a human being like him. on a bunch of people, on a community level, but to judge nature or the whole universe, he's an egoist and an idiot. The human mind is not qualified with the competencies with which it sees universals, abstractions, beginnings, and endings. Did you see right? Have you seen beauty, truth, or freedom? Never. You see, only limited fractions exist, and these are the ones you can judge.
That's an ancient philosophy. Man rules over everything and takes a stand on everything he wants or doesn't want. You judge and reject the universe, we judge and sometimes reject life, and as proof of that, you can commit suicide.
Is this really right?
I didn't commit suicide to tell you.
I will commit suicide, and I will set myself on fire as Buddhists did if man continues in such foolishness and if no law is passed prohibiting such crimes.
Yelling and complaining in the hall. Dr. Shehan answers quietly.
You will prove it. Your absolute freedom, so you'll contradict what you're saying.
Student, in revolution.
It's not a matter of logic. It's a humanitarian matter.
The debate is about to turn into a clash. The students are divided into rings that discuss each other seriously. Once again, we see Professor Shehan beating his hand at the table.
Quiet, please. This is a matter to be decided by the House of Lords. Legislators think of it. It is not a matter for university students to decide.
But it's our destiny.
It's not your fate, but the fate of generations not yet born.
Professor completes.
Also in 2063, there was a revolutionary event. It has been decided that milk and bread with vitamins shall be free of charge, such as air, for all those who need it, and that bread and milk shops shall be kept open for all hours of the night and day. They shall also open dispensaries, hospital reception services, and schools at all stages free of charge. It was also decided that people's suits for all classes would be free as well. Theatrical and movie shows are open without tickets. Drums and books are open for unconditional demand, borrowing, and possession. The World Health Organization declared 10 serious diseases to end. They are tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid, malaria, yellow fever, sleeping sickness, schistosomiasis, syphilis, and gonorrhea. These diseases were finally removed from their list, and their microbes were removed from their list of bacterial diseases. This was the largest victory recorded by medical research since it began. Unfortunately, on the other hand, the census showed that the number of cases of insanity and suicide had increased even more than the number of days of delay and retroactivity. The explanation given by Russian psychiatrist Leopov for this phenomenon was that there are repressed violent energies that must open up natural exits. Leopov demanded the return of free wrestling, boxing, dueling, and yoga clubs. And flights to the depths of space, dangerous circus games, clowning, comedy, skipping, dirty criticism. He said that human beings had to go a little out of line from time to maintain their balance and mental health.
A black eye student interrupting.
Widespread mental misery disproportionate to prosperity and materialism doesn't need Leopov to explain it. Christ explained it more than 1,000 years ago when he said, "Man does not live by bread alone."
Another student chewing gum.
Remember, it's not ordinary bread, it's vitamin bread and chocolate milk.
The black eye student.
The Quran explained it 1,500 years ago when he described the psychological state of the den of infidels like us in the Lord's word, "Whoever stays away from my worship has a hard time living."
Dr. Shehan came back and knocked on the table, and says,
Leopov's explanation might have been insufficient. But the matter has a face other than what believers like you say. And my belief that the secret to this generation's misery lies in the enormous psychological responsibilities that he carries. This generation has received the key to nature and the unveiling of life. And he began to make man into a tube, began to control his qualities, and created him. It's an awful responsibility that slips the biggest minds.
A student with a beard says nervously.
I agree with Leopold anyway that we need wrestling and boxing from time to time, and we need nasty criticism. Would you allow me to criticize our time, Doctor?
Here you go.
The student is blown up.
I think it's the meanest time in history. And it's an ignorant age in prostitution.
Another student.
I think he is Mason.
Another student.
No, he's from the Atonement group.
The student with a beard continues his revolution, screaming louder.
I'm spitting at you. I'm spitting on all of you.
The doctor referred to two university guards, who whispered to one of them.
Take the student to the clinic to give him a shot, Happy Duel, in the vein immediately.
The guards went and carried the student while still screaming and wailing.
I spit on all of you. You're pagan animals.
The sound gradually subsided, and the guards carried the student and disappeared in the long corridor. The students started laughing. Dr. Shahin.
This confirms Leopold's words. We need some violence.
Another student.
He wants to kill. I don't think just violence will do it.
Third student.
I think he just wants to spit.
A fourth student.
I agree with every word he says. We are indeed living in the most contemptuous age of history, despite wealth and well-being.
A fifth student.
If such a man had found his way to lead and rule, we would have gone back to war days.
Dr. Shahin said in a sorry tone.
I don't understand how such mentalities exist in the age of science and light. I don't understand. Men seems to be a very complicated creature.
Another student.
Or maybe we deserve to actually spit on us.
Dr. Shahin replied.
Maybe. But he's not the one spitting on us anyway.
Another student.
Did you see the look of his beard?
Dr. Shahin.
He deserves love anyway. He is in need of someone who loves him. He needs someone to be friends with him.
Another student.
He rejects any friendship, and he shall initiate aggression and attack all who go to him.
Dr. Shahin.
It's our fault. We're the ones who can and can't. We're the ones who failed to earn it. Sometimes I imagine the world still lacks love.
Another student.
It's not the happy duel who's going to make love, my doctor. We live in false vanity.
Dr. Shahin.
Maybe. Maybe.
Rosita is looking at the doctor in love and whispering to her colleague, Delia.
Doesn't he look like a poet? Doesn't he look like an angel? Like the prophets? Look at him talking about love. God, I love him. How I worship him.
What is the tone of the prophets and the God? What's that weird talk?
Yes, Dahlia. As long as I love, God exists.
Love made you completely senile.
Dr. Shahin looked at Rosita.
This is the second time I've caught you thinking your mind out of class. Enough scrawny, Rosita. Please.
Rosita, in love.
I'm the one who please.
Beeping in the final rows of the hall. Dr. Shahin came back, beating the table with his hand, and he was blushing.
And in 2067.
Rosita.
Oh, my God. Did something happen in 2067? It's barely starting.
Yeah, it was a huge event just 3 hours ago. The living protoplasm could be created in the lab from dead materials.
Oh, this is a bullshit event. I think there's a bigger event going on in a few minutes.
What is it?
Oh, darling. We can present this event to the world. I and you're. We get married. What do you think? I want to get engaged to you.
Dr. Shahin is clearly confused, and his face is red. He answers.
I agree.
Applause, clowning, whistling, knocking legs all over the hall. Rosita stands and sends a kiss in the air to the four corners of the hall. Rosita.
And there's another most important event. You've become a father, baby. Yeah. I checked. I'm pregnant. Soon, a new child will come into the world without a tube.
Dance all over the hall. And the students carry Dr. Shahin on their shoulders. And at the door, Kareem stood, looking at his friend in surprise.